Okay, we're live, and welcome to Studio Jakarta EE. And in this interview, I have with me Werner Keil. Welcome, Werner.
Hi, welcome.
So please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you're involved in the Jakarta EE community.
Yeah, I'm involved in several Eclipse projects on several layers for a client, mostly during my day job. It's actually more on the UI front with Eclipse RCP. And in the Jakarta EE community, I help the community as the committer representative in the spec committee for, I think it's the third year now, actually, that started.
Yeah, you're actually elected there you win the election every year.
So at least I think it's the second or third re-election that took place.
And you were pretty active in the Jakarta platform project as well, and with the Jakarta E9 release. And what do you think is the most important thing with the Jakarta 9?
Well, that it's open and transparent is especially helpful. It also, there was, I think, 2 or 3 days ago here in Germany was a day celebrating volunteer activities, the Ehrenamt. And there I basically mentioned that contributing to open source is also a sort of Ehrenamt, and especially, of course, in serving in the spec committee or in a similar working group is pretty similar to an Ehrenamt in, I don't know, let's say for Germany, comparing it to a Faschingsverein that hosts the Carnival every year.
Okay, so you look at the Jakarta E as a carnival.
No, but it's a voluntary activity that people dedicate a lot of time, and in most cases, except maybe for the expenses, they also usually don't get payment. For example, in those carnival communities, they may get a lot of free beer, but usually they don't get money.
No.
So
There's no such thing as free beer, you know.
So the contribution is a little comparable. And of course, there are more people who now are able to contribute and also help shape the community. But again, with some of the larger vendors, including Oracle, stepping a little back and doing less on their side, it of course means that you also need regular activity. And I'm not going to mention names, but if some of the other working group members in various committees either don't even run for the election, as we saw, I think, in the marketing committee, where I can't run in every single one of them, and Arian and a few others can't also run in multiple of them because we have several other responsibilities in the platform project or in detailed projects like security and a few others. And for the marketing committee, it seems that it was not so appealing. I understand it because it may not be everybody's preferred activity unless you work in the marketing department as your day job. But if either nobody volunteers and the seat is not filled, or if the others who got elected have too many conflicting activities elsewhere and they cannot contribute or they cannot join the cause for over 6 months in some cases, then of course, in the worst case, that may even mean that some decisions cannot be made if there's not a quorum. Luckily, we are not so often in that situation. Maybe in the holiday season it might happen, but otherwise, I think we never lost a quorum. But of course, that means if another, let's say, community related representative is not able to participate, then that means the community only has one voice instead of two.
Yeah,
which is
that's
course
a good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. So if you do run in an election and sign up for this engagement, it's actually an obligation to be there, an obligation to the community, not necessarily to the working group, but for the community. Yeah, but there are other ways of contributing than being a member of these committees, and that is the groups where let's call it the real work is done, like in the specification projects.
Yeah.
So and you regularly participate in the platform call as well, and we have weekly calls there that is open for everybody.
So I try. It's also a little easier now with the home office situation, because if I'm at a client on site, then it may not always be possible due to their own security restrictions to dial using some other network than their own. But at least if you have a second screen, that makes it a little easier to spare an hour or two a week.
So you participated, as you said, in Jakarta E9. Do you have any features that you would like to see in upcoming releases? No, the 9.1 release is pretty much set what it will be.
I'm not sure if 9.1, it may be a little too early for 9.1, but there's of course NoSQL or MVC that are ramping up, and in some cases also releasing, especially MVC has an upcoming 2.0 release. So I'm not sure if it's acceptable for 9.1, and I'm a little bit skeptical because in my opinion, it should have some sort of reform of the profiles, that you don't just stuff it into the web profile as yet another feature, but probably try to diversify a little and have whatever you call it. If you call it micro profile because the name started with that idea, sure, why not? Maybe if a different term is better, at least not to confuse it with Eclipse micro profile, then maybe we'll find another one. But there should be a profile, for example, that relies more on the REST plus MVC stack, where implementers are, for example, not forced to also implement the whole servlet stack in parallel, because the two of them are somewhat competing. And if a particular solution wants to be a little smaller and focus on REST APIs, but still have some simple UI based on MVC, then they can basically abandon servlets and facelets and JSP and all the other stuff. But that would require a new profile that's a little similar but lighter and slightly different to the web profile, because I believe REST is part of the web profile, but basically you don't need all the servlet stack to run MVC on top of REST. So it could be a lighter version of the web profile.
Yeah,
it's
interesting. It's interesting that you mentioned it, because this was actually a topic in the roundtable earlier today as well. But there it was more about creating an entirely UI-free profile, more of a headless profile, or a nano micro or micro.
Yeah.
So that also makes sense, and maybe you can have finer granularity. So you have one headless, maybe with CDI Lite, even that is very small, and then a little bit bigger you add MVC, and then even bigger you add servlets and facelets. So you kind of have it.
Yeah, that kind of modular profile, and with modular, some of it may actually also benefit from the Java platform module system that in 9, almost all the specs were actually able to support, at least in a basic form, but some of them didn't have enough time to do that. So I think that's what probably we should do in 9.1 is to make sure that all of them do. So it's also a little easier to then combine and compose modules that consume other modules. And this way, it should be a lot easier to have those kinds of profiles. I'm not sure if Java SE really still calls them profiles, but there, sometimes you can also combine what you want with JLink and literally have a JDK of your choice and completely leave swing away or completely leave, well, Java FX is not even part of the JDK, but you could have one that has no swing, and then you add Java FX or OpenJFX on top of that. So you can do something similar in Java SE, and I guess in that direction, what you mentioned with a stacked or a very small profile that then has a few optional modules would allow something very similar for Jakarta.
Yeah, so you're involved in as we talked about, in the spec committee, and you're in the platform project and in several other of the specifications as well. Why do you think people should get engaged in the Jakarta EE community? How does that help you in your daily work?
Well, for example, in the previous client, that was a lot about security and securing the e-health. We also have another talk about that tomorrow, by the way. And some of it also is some aspect of a book that Arian and fellow Jakarta EE ambassador Todori Spice and myself are working on in the next couple of months. So we hope most of us will take a little time over the Christmas holidays when some have a little more time of their day jobs. So we expect the book sometime in the first half of next year. And some of it, especially on the Java SE side, or the changes that were necessary to make SOAP still work in Java 11, they are actually related to Jakarta EE. So with some of the clients, I usually end up using that experience. In the current one, it may not always be completely my responsibility to deal on the backend side, because there are other teams that do it and I'm consuming it. But even there, we are using a lot of SOAP, and should we ever upgrade from Java SE 8 to 11 or above, then of course we need to use Jakarta EE. So it's quite natural having to use it, and that of course is beneficial when you're very close to those who shape the community or even help shape some of it yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm not getting paid for the Ehrenamt, but in some cases, I know, for example, there was another banking customer a few years ago, and they were also the observers of the Java Money API and one of the GSRs that I'm leading. That among the very few that have not gone to Jakarta EE, but there I also lead two of those. And in that particular case, they were contributing, or at least observing and participating in Java Money, and they also subscribed to the mailing list. And unfortunately, due to budget constraints, the customer was not allowed to actually get new people on board. But when we were discussing it, they were very keen to get me on board, and they said, in most cases, we want people to fly into Switzerland and meet us in person, and then maybe do some code puzzle. But we know what you have done to with the Java Money project all those years. So you don't have to do that. We would hire you straight away if we are allowed to.
Yeah. So being a part of specifying the technology you work with in the daily life is a good way of getting job. So with that note, our time is up, so we have to close this session, and everybody else can go to the next session, which will be a session by Ed Burns and Emily Young. They will transfer a Spring Boot application to MicroProfile. So that will be interesting. So thank you very much, Werner.
Okay.
And we'll meet again.
Okay. Then thanks for inviting me, and have a good rest of the evening, and see you soon.
Thank
Bye.
you.